On this edition of the program, we bring you a story that could only exist on the internet with Wake Up to Politics' Gabe Fleischer, and how understanding your anxiety can help you understand your political foes and possibly heal the world. It's a feel-good episode of PX3, and it's happening right now. Hello and welcome everybody to the Politics program for Friday, March 15th. Is it the Ides of March? I believe it's the Ides of March. Beware. But on this edition, like I said before, we are going to be bringing you a couple different interviews. I promised you that we were going to do another episode, that we were going to do our morbid episode. We'll get to when you can expect that at the end of the show. But I want to bring you two really, really cool conversations that I had an absolute blast with. The first is with Gabe Fleischer. If you haven't read his newsletter, Wake Up to Politics, then please go ahead and subscribe to it. It's one of the best in my opinion. I read 3 of them every day. Punch Bowl News. I read Politico. I read Wake Up to Politics. And then weekly, Dave Weigel's Semaphore newsletter. It takes a lot of talent to do that. And as far as I know, only Weigel and Fleischer do it by themselves, and only Fleischer does it every day. But amidst his busy schedule, he found a great story on the internet, and we're going to let him tell it. Welcome to the show, Gabe Fleischer. Joining me once again on the program is Gabe Fleischer of the Wake Up to Politics newsletter. How you doing, Gabe?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm fantastic. So not only have you continued to write your newsletter, but you had a great story that I really wanted the listeners to hear about a little-known Twitter account that found a following in the halls of Congress. Tell us a little bit about this.
Yeah, that's right. So for the past few years or so, I've been seeing this Twitter account. It's called @Ringless. And he just tweets all day, every day about congressional procedure, and has really gained this huge following in Washington, among Hill staffers, congressional reporters, lobbyists, really influential people in Washington at the very highest levels for just knowing everything there is to know about congressional procedure. Whenever there is anything to do in the news with any kind of rules or procedures in Congress, he's on the top of the game. He's there, and he's basically correcting members of Congress, correcting the parliamentarians, correcting reporters, kind of has learned the rules front to back. And so I was very fascinated by this account, but he's completely anonymous. And there's been this parlor game among Hill staffers, because they all assume it's got to be a congressional staffer. He knows the rules front to back. Who else could it be besides someone on the Hill? But I was able to find out who it was. He is very much not a congressional staffer. He is a 20-year-old in the United Kingdom, a college student. And so I was able to interview him and reveal who he was and kind of talk a little bit about his account, how he got interested in it, and kind of the importance of congressional procedure.
Well, let me before we go into his identity, give me an example. Give the listeners an example of something that he would correct people on in the moment, in real time.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of examples. I talk a lot in the piece. I mean, one thread of his that got a lot of attention a few weeks ago was I don't know if you saw, there was the ruling. A judicial ruling about House proxy voting, kind of calling House proxy voting unconstitutional. That being the voting system that was used while the Democrats controlled the House, that allowed members of Congress to vote from afar, kind of using a proxy on the floor. And that was a thread of his that got a lot of attention. He picked apart that ruling with tons of examples as a federal judge, tons of examples of the kind of small, some small and some big kind of parliamentary errors in the judicial opinion, and just the ways in which the kind of the wording and kind of references it used kind of do not comport with the actual kind of rules and precedents of the House. And so that was one example that got a lot of retweets and a lot of views on Twitter. But it's all kinds of things like that. I mean, he's correcting that. That's an example of him correcting a judge. He'll correct members of Congress. The parliamentarians, I mean, I think maybe not necessarily correct, but he oftentimes has different interpretations of the rules than parliamentarians, which is kind of interesting. Since most of us parliamentarians says something, I think most of us kind of nod along and assume that's the only interpretation, since most of us are not as well versed. But I mean, there's all sorts of examples. He's doing this all the time.
So when you're parsing through this and you're talking to Hill staffers, the assumption is that there's probably an angle here. That there's some kind of version of like somebody's gaining an advantage, because obviously on the Hill, everything on some level is an insular community. Nobody would care this much about it if they didn't have skin in the game. What were some of the conspiracy theories of the identity before you solved the case in your piece?
Yeah, I mean, there was a whole lot of guesses. Everyone I interviewed, before, pretty early in the process of reporting the story, I discovered the identity of who it was, but I interviewed a lot of sources of people on the Hill, and I didn't tell anyone who it was as I was interviewing them, because I kind of wanted to hear their theories and hear their guesses, and there was a lot of them. I mean, there's definitely a lot of people that thought it must be someone who was either in or used to be in the parliamentarian's office. Obviously, that makes sense. Those are the people on the Hill known to be, like, the most well-versed in the rules. A lot of people thought it was someone in the leadership offices. Again, especially nowadays, most kind of just typical member of Congress offices don't really spend that much time reading up on the rules, so it's kind of the leadership office that does a lot of this. So, I mean, I heard people thinking it must be someone who'd been in leadership offices, 10, 20, 30 years. There were some people who were able to suss out from his tweets that he was in the UK, but still assumed, okay, that must mean someone who works for the House of Commons.
They left, yeah.
Exactly. Either had worked in Congress and now an expat in Britain, or had worked in kind of the UK Parliament and kind of on parliamentary stuff on that side of the pond. And so there was a whole lot of guesses, but certainly no one even close to the truth. But yeah, a lot of people assumed. I mean, I would ask. I didn't quite ask people the age, because I think I didn't want to give it away too much. But I mean, but sometimes people just volunteer. Well, it's got to be. And like, what do you picture when you're tweeting with this account? If you tell me, oh, it's like an 80-year-old, someone in the library of rule books, like stroking their beard, this really old man. Who's had a long, illustrious career, now retired, and like has nothing to do but kind of sit around and tweet about how
correct people. Like. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, so that was definitely the image people had in their mind, was like someone who worked on the Hill or something like that for a long time and now retired. Definitely very, very kind of older person.
So what's fascinating about this story, and hopefully people kind of understand that the gist of it, is that it turns out that the solution to this mystery is something that very much parallels the reporter who is uncovering it. You, Gabe, are somebody that is very early in your career. You are intensely interested in politics. You have found yourself a following within DC. And now the person that is unmasked on this Twitter account is this almost UK doppelganger of your journey. At what point when you find this out, are you doing the Spider-Man meme to each other?
I mean, it's funny, yeah. I mean, I think, to be honest, this sounds very weird, but, like, that is honestly what kind of started me interested in the story from the first place, is I had this intuition that it was someone young, and I can't really speak to why. And I think I just kind of, like, the kind of conceit of the piece that it was like this kind of young person kind of schooling everyone in politics, that was kind of like in my head from the beginning before I even knew who it was, because I think I just kind of maybe language, I can't really even tell you why, but that was kind of my guess. That's what kind of intrigued me about it. So I think that's kind of something that drew me to the story in the first place. I think once I able to find out his identity, obviously, he had been anonymous and was committed to staying anonymous. I can't say for sure, but I think perhaps, it always helps to gain trust of a source, if you have some sort of commonality. So I think that certainly helped in terms of, he knew I was someone young. I wasn't trying to, take advantage of him or anything like that. Like, I was just another young reporter who, like you said, has had kind of a similar story. And so I think there's kind of a shared respect there. And I also say personally, for me, it was very exciting to be able to do this story because, I think you're right. I obviously got into journalism very young, and I was helped by a lot of journalists who kind of like wrote about me and kind of shared my story and gave me a platform when I was pretty young. So it was very rewarding to me to do that for someone else who's very young. And I mean, maybe he's a doppelganger of mine. He certainly knows a lot more than me. I mean, certainly about congressional. Like, I follow Congress very closely. I like to think of myself as knows something about the procedure and rules, but he certainly well surpasses me in terms of his knowledge there. And so it was very cool. And in a sense, the piece, his following's like exploded on Twitter, and he's gotten all these sorts of offers and stuff. So it's been very cool to see. And that's something that kind of happened to me at certain points in my career. And so it's very cool to be able to do that for someone else.
Well, and just to give people a background, and it's something that I very much respect your story, and I respect you, and I'm a fan of the newsletter, so I never want to bring you on the show and say, kid reporter Gabe Fleisher, isn't he adorable? But just so folks know, if they're not familiar with your backstory, how long have you been writing Wake Up to Politics?
Been writing the newsletter about like 12, 13 years now. So a while.
And
I'm
you are how
22
old?
now. So
Yeah,
people
okay.
can do the
So
math themselves.
yeah. You have been writing it for a very, very long time, and I do think that what's fascinating about that story, what I really, really liked about it is I'm an internet optimist myself, and certainly there is a lot of ills that happen, especially in the world of politics. I don't think that you can follow this without being very aware of some of the toxicity that comes out of it. But one of the greatest things is there is an element of meritocracy. At the end of the day, people want something to pay attention to. And if you're willing, in your case, to wake up every single day and write a political newsletter, which is something that I have done in portions of my life, it's not easy. Let me let everybody know. It is not a job. It's a lifestyle to do something like that on a daily basis. Or like this young man in the UK, to have such an encyclopedic knowledge that you want to enter in to the absolute battle pits of Twitter and start matching wits with people who not only know their stuff, but also are probably not going to be shy about sharing it or calling your bluff or citing it or going tweet for tweet with you until everybody probably should be long asleep. That takes work. It takes time and it takes commitment. And the beautiful thing about it is that, hey, you don't need to have come. You can be at any point in your career. If you want to put in the work, people are going to understand it and recognize it.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that was one of the quotes that I love most in the piece was I quoted Matt Glassman, who's a congressional expert, who said, like, this story is an example, so, like, the best of what Twitter can be and the best of what the internet can be. Like, it kind of lifts someone up. I mean, like, obviously here in Washington, there's, it's a lot of talking to the same people and a lot of, kind of familiar, the usual suspects talking to each other. And that was kind of the way, the world worked for a very long time. And I think there's obviously risks to kind of moving to the kind of more democratized information space that you're describing. There's a lot of them. But there's also these very cool stories. And I think, it allows, to be kind of open up. It's not just, you don't have to have worked in Congress for 20 years. If you do the work, and he's done the work, he's learned these rules, he does his research, he knows his stuff. If you're able to do that, like you say, it's a meritocracy. You can kind of rise to the top. I think, and that's true. And I think something that is interesting to me about the story is, like, or I guess, you bring up like kind of a parallel between me and him. Obviously, I did it, not being anonymous. I've always been very upfront with who I am and my age. And I think there's ways that's kind of helped me and I'm sure also hurt. And, there's all that. I think for him, especially for this like very like specific world of congressional procedure, I think would be very hard to get into if you're like, yep, I'm a 20-year-old in UK. I have to say, people be like, okay, thank you, goodbye. And so I do think, I'm sure that anonymous aspect kind of helped. I think people could, just because people assumed he was a Hill staffer, so they're willing to take him seriously. So I think it is kind of a lesson to take people more seriously, not only based on credentials, not that credentials never matter and are never relevant, but sometimes people can surprise you, and you shouldn't judge a book by the cover. And sometimes if people prove to you that they can do the work and they've read their stuff, you shouldn't just take on face value, oh, you're this age or you're from this place, that means you shouldn't be listened to. Sometimes there's people from a range of backgrounds that can bring pretty valuable stuff to the table.
I think with the Twitter account, the medium is the message ultimately. And on Twitter, which has a very rich history of the most colorful characters being anonymous, it doesn't hurt to fit into that lineage and say, oh, I am yet another one of these people that will go tweet for tweet with you and will cite sources and will make sure that my argument is heard. I don't know if it would have precluded him from getting a reputation. I think that it would have made him easier to attack. It probably helped his defense. It would have necessarily had too much to do with his offense. From your perspective, though, I do think that, the work for you is the fact that there's an email every day. At the end of the day, either it's there or it's not. And, especially in this media market where, it's harder and harder to get a kind of gig that used to exist. I've seen a lot of people that have gone into the world of Substack or some of these more direct-to-consumer models and are finding out that, boy, the world's hard when you don't have an editor that's putting the screws to you and saying this is what we need to cover every day. That it is hard to self-motivate. It is hard to get up and make sure that you do it. That work ethic, I think, is rare and ultimately it's why I'm always happy that the process that I went through was similar. And it's like, hey, if you're going to build an audience online, there's only one way to do it. It's to show up every single day online and say, throw out your stall and say, here are my wares. Let me ask you this. Something that you have done with Wake Up to Politics has been a far more analytical newsletter. It's more about the news of the day and analyzing it from your perspective. This was more of a traditional reporting news story. Is this something that you are going to incorporate more into the newsletter, or is this another avenue that you're going to pursue outside of it?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, to me, the newsletter, it's something that is great about, kind of, as you're talking about, being kind of independent and kind of hanging your own shingle is like, I feel the ability to kind of do a lot of different sorts of stories and kind of experiment a lot. I do a lot of analysis pieces for sure, but I do original reporting on the newsletter, and definitely something I continue to do. I think in general, and I wrote about this a little bit in Monday's newsletter, I think my hope, more and more the past year or so in the newsletter, been kind of writing about kind of something more of like an overarching theme, not every day, but kind of more often, kind of about, I like to think of it as function and dysfunction in Washington, kind of how Washington works and how it doesn't, and whether it works and whether it doesn't. And I think for me, this is a piece that was for a different publication, but kind of fit into those themes, talking about, and especially love talking about young people and highlight when young people are doing great work. A young person who not only has great knowledge, built a great knowledge, but also, if you read the piece, has a point to make about Congress and the ways that potentially Congress could work a little bit better and be a little bit more productive if people had as deep an understanding of the rules. Maybe not as he has, because that takes a lot of time, at least something close to it. And so to me, that is kind of a message that's really resonating with me, and something I've been trying to do in my analysis pieces of the newsletter, and also hoping to do a lot more original reporting kind of to that end, kind of focusing and lifting up the people and groups, because there are them in Washington that are kind of talking about these ideas and kind of thinking through, ways to kind of unjam Congress a little bit and kind of make our government work better, more productively, more efficiently, more in a more bipartisan fashion. And I think from kind of an odd angle, but this story is kind of one of those ways, talking about ways lawmakers could kind of learn the rules and learn that, it is possible, as kind of he makes the point in the piece, we think of Congress as being so centralized, and that's true, but it's kind of true by norm, not by rule. And if majorities of the House and Senate want things to get done, they often can. They just need to know the rules to use it, the rules to get it done, and they can go around their leaders, and bipartisan coalitions can make things happen. And I think those are ideas I'm really interested in pursuing, both through analysis and through my own reporting.
Well, while I have you here, and I would encourage everybody to read that piece, but I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about some of the stories of the day here. Compared to our last episode that will have come out on Wednesday, the House did indeed pass a bill that now goes to the Senate, and the president says he will sign it if it passes that hurdle, to force the divestment from ByteDance of the American app TikTok, with a ban forthcoming if that does not happen, should it indeed become law. You are of a demo for which is TikTok is extraordinarily culturally important. What is your take on all of it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a few different levels here. I think, as I was just saying, bipartisanship is something I've been writing a lot about in the newsletter. I think so. I do think this is a great example of
this is bipartisan.
This is bipartisan, sweeping bipartisan vote and kind of fastening coalitions. And I think really what strikes me is, if you take the last kind of year or so in Washington, the two issues most likely to generate bipartisan support have been cracking down on big tech, something that Democrats have been talking about from the left and Republicans have been talking about from the right, and countering China. And so this is kind of just the perfect intersection of these two issues, kind of perfectly generated to get a lot of cross-party support. So I think that was very interesting to see. We'll see whether that kind of translates to the Senate, but we're already seeing some signs, at least, that more senators are signing on after seeing kind of this overwhelming vote. So I think in terms of, so that's kind of the kind of legislative analysis.
Yeah.
On the political ends, I think it's interesting, talking to other young people. I use TikTok. Most of my friends use TikTok. The only ones who don't are kind of the ones who have deleted it because they felt it was taking up too much of their time, which honestly is, I mean, probably not a reason to ban it, but another reason to be concerned about it at the very
Yeah.
least, besides just the national security concerns. But it's interesting, when you talk to young people, I think there's this just overwhelming skepticism towards any big tech companies, that they're all kind of listening to us, they're all tracking our data. It's like this almost kind of, I guess skepticism is the right word, because it's almost dismissiveness, because it's like it's a cynicism that is so ingrained to the point that no one really cares, no one's that alarmed by it, because like, oh yeah, they're all listening to us, they're all kind of using our data. I think a lot of young people have kind of just accepted the notion that we live our lives online, and that kind of gives that we've kind of handed over a lot to these companies, and they'll do with that what they will. So I think the challenge in terms of political messaging will be on political leaders to explain why this is different, why it's different
Yeah.
to give this information to the Chinese government effectively versus giving it to Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, tech leaders like that. I think when you talk to young people, that is kind of the thing that I hear the most, at least, like this lack of clarity of why this is any different. Why are you banning TikTok but not these other tech companies that, as far as they know, are doing the same thing? Of course, there are genuine national security differences, in terms of obviously the governing structures of these companies, and just kind of the relationship to China, which is an adversarial country. So I think that's kind of the political challenge. Whether it's that much of an animating issue for that many voters, I'm skeptical. I mean, we saw this kind of like brief lobbying campaign of like TikTok, recruited all these young people to call Congress and all that.
Did it seemed to backfire?
Yeah,
That
seemed
one.
to
That one.
backfire, and I think it was
Yeah.
more a reflection of like they were kind of like blocking usage of the app, making you to do that. Like, I don't think that reflects like the genuine groundswell of like political energy among young people. I don't think this will be like the biggest issue on people's minds when they go to vote. Probably a lot of the people making those calls will not vote, just statistically speaking. So I'm skeptical it's a huge political issue, but to the extent it is, I think that's just going to be the challenge for lawmakers to kind of explain to people, because I think there is among Gen Z just such a feeling of blase feeling about our data privacy. That's not an issue that a lot of people care about. So I think that's kind of the real challenge, is explaining why this one does matter a little bit more than the other companies we interact with.
Yeah, I'm curious, because it seems to me pretty clearly that this is getting banned for culture reasons as much as security reasons. Like, there are a lot of companies that own apps that have a lot of the same permissions that TikTok has on cell phones for people across the country, some with larger user bases, that are not getting singled out like this, at least not now. What does seem to be different, and seems to be the impetus for this kind of exploding out of the House at a time when nothing explodes out of the House with kind of bipartisan support like this did, is that culturally there might be some undue influence that is controlled by a foreign power onto the American populace. And regardless of whether or not you agree with that, what I don't think is really arguable is that TikTok is right now probably the animating media force. If you just look at what comes downstream from things that explode on that platform, it really has replaced Facebook and Twitter as the platform where things break, where things are, where things kind of explode.
Yeah. I would say I would agree. I think for my generation, TikTok has become the platform, has, just like you said, kind of outpaced anything else. But I do think there are reasons to that, and those reasons are tied to why it is kind of a larger national security threat than some of these other apps. I think what's so fascinating to me about TikTok is the algorithmic nature, and obviously all these apps use algorithms, and algorithms are key to what we're seeing on the app. But there's no app quite like TikTok where the front page, I mean, Twitter is obviously moving in this direction, but TikTok's kind of the first app that came on the scene kind of ingrained with the idea that it's really less about who you follow and seeing things from your friends. It's more about the app will give you what it gives you. Most social media up to this point has been like, oh, I want to follow XYZ, I want to see what my friends are doing, and then also I know that that's going to come in a certain order that the app tells me, and maybe it'll be interspersed with a few things the app is giving me. But the central feed is going to be the things that I want to see, or at least the people I want to see things from, and the app will then have some algorithm to determine which of those people I'm seeing. TikTok is completely different than that, and I think that's why it's such a different political tool. It's a much harder tool for political campaigns and candidates to game for that reason, and then it's also a bigger risk for that reason because it's an app where like the controllers of the app, the owners of the app, have so much more power over what their users are seeing. And I think we do see. I mean, I see it just in conversations with the people, the extent to which TikTok is kind of changing people's minds and public opinion and changing how Gen Z thinks about a lot of different issues. Now, I think up to this point, there's no proof necessarily that's as part of some kind of a certain attempt by ByteDance to game it in a certain way. I don't think we have clear evidence of that yet. But you see the risk where like this app, it's almost all algorithmic based. It's almost all
Yes.
For you page. And if they wanted to show young people certain messages ahead of an election geared towards one candidate, there's like very few guardrails against that in a way that doesn't really exist in any other app. So not only is it a much more effective political messaging app right now, it's also one with there's so many less guardrails and just so much more control to the people who own it, which is what makes it really distinct and is certainly, whoever owns it, my guess is it will still be around in November 2024, still be on American phones. Who owns it will be less clear, but will play a role in the election to some degree just because of how many young people are just constantly scrolling and scrolling and scrolling.
And whether or not it has that same algorithm, because the last time that we did this dance with ByteDance, China came out and said, absolutely not. You will not have this algorithm, which is the same algorithm that they use with Douyin in China, their Chinese version of it. Obviously, more to play out there, and I'm sure that there will be a lot of amateur roll call folks on TikTok as the Senate votes become more and more clear. But just to get you out of here on one more question, you spend a lot of time talking about the bipartisan nature of Congress. We had a very animated announcement of a early retirement, somebody that was already going to not run for re-election, Ken Buck, a hardline Republican, saying that he is out next week on March 22nd. That leaves an already thin majority for the Republicans, even thinner. Ken Buck was one of the people that helped orchestrate the Kevin McCarthy coup, which has partly led this chaos. What do you make of this? Yet another element of retirement, and it seems like a gigantic reshuffling in Congress, the likes of which we haven't really seen in a while.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly funny in terms of, you opening a question talking about bipartisanship, and it's true that Ken Buck has been someone who's kind of criticized kind of Republican leaders. If you've been following politics a long time, it's funny to hear Ken Buck kind of named in that kind of category since he started his career, very far to the right,
firebrand,
Tea Party firebrand. So it is funny, definitely, the evolutions people have, that he's now seen as, sort of like, moderate Republican, at least by some metrics, leaving. When for most of his career he's been nothing of the sort. I mean, it thins the margin that much more. Only 2 votes, so House Republicans can lose in every vote. I mean, that is so fragile. It's why you see this TikTok bill did not go through the Rules Committee. It went through suspension of the rules, kind of process that requires 2/3 support. That's how every major piece of legislation is going to be going for the rest of the Congress, because House Republicans just cannot afford to put rules on the floor. They lose too many of them. So, basically anytime there's going to be bipartisan legislation, it needs to happen through suspension of the rules. That retirement influences that. It's just a more hollowing out of members of Congress who have been there for several terms. You hear Buck, he's leaving for a reason. He's very frustrated. He's frustrated by what's going on, by the obstruction, by dysfunction. And, every member like that who retires, oftentimes is replaced by someone. I mean, he might be replaced by Lauren Boebert in November, not in the special election, but, generally replaced by people even less amenable to working across the aisle with even less institutional knowledge, people who generally are more interested in kind of messaging than policy. That's been the trend, at least, when kind of longer serving members like him leave. And so, it's just another continuation of that trend and a worrying one. I talk to a lot of experts all the time that, that it's a trend. They're very worried about watching kind of the Congress, but the House Republican Conference in particular.
Yeah, well, and I got to wonder whether or not we are going to look back at that McCarthy removal and see an inflection point, not only with this House Republican Conference, because, look, when I hear Ken Buck out there saying, oh my God, there's so much dysfunction. This is a terrible Congress. There's a lot of people on the way out. It's a little, I think you should leave Hot Dog Man saying we're all looking for the people who did this, because, there was a lot of complaining about Kevin McCarthy, which, say what you will about him, nothing really has changed. It's not like we have gotten to a full non-omnibus utopia that people were screaming and yelling about that ousted somebody that, think what you will of him, and there's plenty of legitimate criticisms, but he was at least a steady hand on the wheel that was trying to move government forward. Now that it is totally ground to a halt with dysfunction, I don't have a tremendous amount of sympathy for the folks who helped pull that trigger, because there's a reason why we are at least here now.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I wrote the morning after McCarthy was moved, and this applies to Republicans who helped make it happen, and also the Democrats.
And the Democrats, agreed.
The Democrats will miss him when he's gone, Kevin McCarthy, because I agree with you, say what you will about him. He was someone who at least had institutional knowledge, had been there a long time. He had voted, at least, in favor of Ukraine aid, as just a member with his vote, was not something Mike Johnson had done. And I think you see the kind of consequences of that now. Not saying that McCarthy would have brought Ukraine into a vote, but at least had been someone at least slightly more passionately in support of it than Johnson had ever been. Should Democrats have voted to kept him or not? That's up to them. But certainly, I think you're right. You see the consequences of that, and I think it was not hard to predict that McCarthy would only be replaced by someone a little bit more, further to the right, less interested in getting things done across the aisle. Although, to be fair, Johnson, I think is not. You see a vote like this, the TikTok vote. You saw the 6 appropriation bill package. Not that he's been kind of a completely partisan speaker. But hard to argue, that he's been more.
Well, it's an impossible job. Yes. Like, he took a job that was already impossible, and now he had less experience and less clout and less relationships. So what do you think was going to happen? Less things are going to wind up getting done. Gabe Fleisher, the Wake Up to Politics newsletter. Everybody who listens to this should subscribe to that. Thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
This is your update, brought to you by TakePoliticsSeriously.com. That's where you go if you want to support this show. Head on over right now, friends. Let's go ahead and get to some of the stories that we didn't get a chance to talk about in this episode. At a crucial moment in the Ohio Senate's Republican primary, Democrats, through the Duty and Country PAC, linked to Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, are strategically promoting a Republican candidate, Bernie Moreno, who is endorsed by former President Donald Trump to challenge Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown. By launching a television ad, the democratically linked super PAC highlights Moreno's endorsement by Trump and labels him too conservative for Ohio. The intent is to sway Republican voters in Moreno's favor. If the Democrats are saying that he's too conservative, well, then he's probably exactly as conservative as I'd like. That is under the belief that he would be the weaker opponent against Brown in the general election. And remember, Ohio is a very, very Republican state these days. Sherrod Brown is going to really, really have to run uphill to win this race. It's a maneuver that reflects Democrats' tactical approach to influencing Republican primaries, something that they've done a lot over the past few years. They see Moreno's staunch conservative stances, such as supporting the national abortion ban and repealing the Affordable Care Act, as liabilities in the race in November. So we've seen this a lot from the Democrats, and we specifically saw it very recently in the primary in California, where both Katie Porter and Adam Schiff ran ads similar to this one, where they were promoting getting name recognition for Republican candidates. In Schiff's case, it was for Steve Garvey, who wound up getting second, therefore securing a Republican versus Democrat general election, which means the Democrat's going to win because it's California. So Senator-elect Adam Schiff, congratulations. Porter was trying to raise the profile of Garvey, the other Republican in Garvey's camp, hoping to split the vote so Porter could shoot the gap and be number 2 and get into a one-on-one dogfight with Schiff. But usually what happens is Democrats spend a lot of money to boost a MAGA candidate. And whatever we might think about Donald Trump's electoral prowess, there is one thing that is for sure. Down ballot, if you are trying to be Trump, but you are not Trump, you are electorally vulnerable. Obviously, Democrats believe Moreno fits that profile. Speaker Mike Johnson has indicated the possibility of altering House rules concerning the motion to vacate. A significant procedural tool that recently facilitated the removal of former Speaker Kevin McCarthy. Speaking at the House Republicans' annual retreat in West Virginia, Johnson clarified that although he personally has not advocated such change, I mean, it's the way that he got the job, after all. There is broad discussion amongst members about to modify the rules to foster a quote-unquote more normal process on the House floor. Currently, the rule allows a single member to initiate a motion to vacate, compelling a vote on the Speaker's removal. This threshold, reduced to one thin member at McCarthy's agreement to satisfy hardline conservatives, ultimately led to his downfall when Representative Matt Gaetz of Florida successfully rallied support to oust him, causing weeks of Republican chaos and halting legislative activities. Johnson's remarks suggest a forthcoming evaluation of the House rules package, aiming to ensure the stability and effective governance of the institution in future Congresses. I mean, it's got to go, or at least has to be more than one person. I don't think anybody involved in the removal of Kevin McCarthy, as we just talked about with Gabe Fleischer, believes that the motion to vacate being at one is good. And you have to wonder, Matt Gaetz did the thing. If you threaten to do the thing, you can get a lot of what you want. If you do the thing, then now somebody's got to do something about it. So I wonder on both sides. Insurgents who want to do whatever they want, basically exercise power outside of their own political position. So if you're part of a broad bipartisan coalition and you have the power of that amount of people, that block of people, you can block legislation, you can introduce it with a lot of momentum, that kind of stuff. If you're part of an insurgency, so you're a smaller group, but you have very specific aims, if you are holding something up, or in the case of the motion to vacate, you have a gun that you can point at the Speaker whenever you want and say, I will pull the trigger unless you do what I say, well, it gives you a little bit more utility. I believe on both sides of the aisle, every insurgency on either side of these coalitions will demand a one-vote motion to vacate. The only way to get around it is to have enough of a majority that you can get your Speaker elected. Right now, we are not close to that on either side. And that's your update. TakePoliticsSeriously.com is where you need to go if you want not one, but 2 bonus episodes each and every week. Head on over there. Take politics seriously. $3 a week for the price of a cup of coffee. If you would buy me a cup of coffee so I can sit in your car and give you all the news that we miss on our free podcasting schedule, then, let's do it. Big news season. I want to hang out with you. Let's hang out. But I want money first. Transactional relationship. I should stop talking. TakePoliticsSeriously.com. My guest today is Dr. Kirk J. Schneider. He is the author of Life Enhancing Anxiety, and he's going to talk to us about how we can better understand not only the political world as it exists, but also those that stand on the other side of the aisle that we do. Dr. Schneider, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Justin. Much appreciated.
Can you explain life enhancing anxiety in general before we dive into the political element of it?
Sure. Let me begin with anxiety first.
Yeah.
That's a good one to start with.
You know we love it here.
Well, we all experience it. My understanding of anxiety is that it's basically a terror of the unknown or a fear of the unknown. Now, regular fear is a fear of a specific object usually, like a spider or something that's different or a person that's different. And it's more contained in that way. Anxiety is more fundamental and probably more cross-cultural, because it seems to relate to a very primal experience that we all have, which is our confrontation with the unknown, with that which is other and different, the moment we come out of the chute as children, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And the moment we shift from relative non-being and unity and a kind of passivity in our connection with our mother and wherever we come out of, to sudden abrupt disunity and mayhem when we come out as children. So that's a very powerful experience. It's been measured physiologically. The stress is off the charts. It's higher than even severe adult stress. There's been lots of studies indicating that that's a very formative experience for us humans, and seems to be the kind of template for virtually all future anxiety and trauma that we experience. And so the whole question of how we're met as neonates, as newborns, when we come into that chaotic, floundering world where we don't have the equipment or skills to deal with it at all, and we're just in a kind of a free fall. I call it a sense of groundlessness and helplessness.
Yeah.
That's the kind of basic experience of anxiety of the unknown. So how we're met by our caretakers and by the culture that surrounds us is critical to moving toward another level of anxiety that I call life-enhancing anxiety. So if we're met more by fear and anxiety in the caretakers and the culture, which we unfortunately too often are, I think.
Yes.
We're never really given the tools to be more present and to work with that which is other and different and unknown. Then I think we're hounded by that primal anxiety much of our lives, and it drives us to live more narrow lives because we're kind of skimming surfaces, so we don't go very deep. We have problems with uncomfortable ideas and uncomfortable conversations because it starts to trigger that very primal place. And that's why those conversations, by the way, I think go downhill so quickly, because they are so primal for most people. But if we are met more with support and understanding by the caretakers, the culture, and ongoingly after we become adults even, this is a lifetime process, then we're more able to, as I define life-enhancing anxiety, we're more able to have the capacity to live with and make the best of the depth and mystery of existence. That's one way to put it. Or let me put it more concretely.
Yeah.
We have a greater capacity to live on the edge of wonder and discovery as opposed to terror and overwhelm, and thereby be more open to.
So let me just have a general question about anxiety, because it's something that I've thought a lot about in my own life, and it's something that I found personally. I tended to find that I could unlock a lot more of myself and my own productivity the more that I understood that anxiety was not something that I had to banish or I had to be free of, but rather something that I had to understand, and it had to teach me something as opposed to just paralyze me. But my fascination with anxiety has, in what you just said, led me to this idea that it's always in this superposition. There's what we don't know and we have no idea about. I have no concept of whether or not the universe will fold in on itself in the middle of this interview and I'll die. So I don't worry about it all that much. It just is a thing that I have no idea. And then there's things that I know a lot about. And that's where some people come and listen to this show, because I am so dialed into politics. I'm so dialed into political history that sometimes things that would seem odd or are reacted to gigantically by the media don't bother me as much, because for anything that's a mean thing that somebody says online, it's not Bobby Kennedy getting shot in the street. So I have a different sense of that. But what happens, the most dangerous thing is stuff that's right there in the middle, where I know enough about it that I can imagine awful things, I can imagine terrible things, but I don't know enough about it to kind of cap it or put it in some kind of general idea. Is that a fundamental understanding of anxiety from your perspective in studying this?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It relates to something we call catastrophizing.
Yes.
That middle place may be a place for that many of us catastrophize, because it kind of makes our mind begin to go wild about, okay, there's a disturbance here, there's a shooting here, there's a riot here. What might that lead to? It starts
Yes.
opening up all kinds of fears. And again, I would say they're very primal, and not just in terms of our individual birth, but our ancestry. This goes very far back. We call it signal anxiety. We don't know if there's a tiger in the woods.
Yes.
And so that anticipation makes us, begin to sweat, and our hearts race. And depending on how well we're able to handle that anxiety, we may start to be overwhelmed by it. We may want to escape right away, or fight, get in a big fighting kind of reaction. The whole point is, are you reacting more than responding?
Okay.
Responding would be more of a centered, present place with one's anxiety. And I say anxiety because it's still a kind of a life force, but it can be a life force for mobilizing in a constructive way as well as a destructive way. That's part of the point. And I guess what you're saying is that middle place can sometimes be destructive.
At least it has for me. It has for me that the catastrophizing element is something that I think is central, not only to a lot of conversations I tend to have more and more as I age, but also I think is central to where we are in our current political landscape. Because for as far back as democracy, the concept goes, there's an element of catastrophization that comes along with an animated political argument for which people are going to put their vote forth. And I've, in my lifetime, seen the period for which culturally we tended to tolerate a heightened level of catastrophization, which used to be somewhere in my youth, and maybe this is just the folly of not having an adult sensibility, that it was about a year, maybe even less than that, that we would say, okay, everybody put on your red jersey, everybody put on your blue jersey. We're gonna say, well, LBJ is gonna drive us into Vietnam. Barry Goldwater's gonna drop a nuke on China. Let's have these moments. We're gonna scream and yell at each other, and then there's gonna be a vote. And at a certain point, it's gonna be gauche. Society will say you're impolite at a dinner party to bring this up. Where now, and I could bore you with an hour and a half on why I think this is, but I think that now our catastrophization has not only become pretty much 24/7. We don't have a whole lot of cultural guardrails for it, but it's taken the natural element of that in politics, which again I think is normal. I don't blame the politicians or the campaigns. This is what they've done forever. For whatever reason, our society has said, no, we at a certain point, we're not going to say, no, shut up. You're just trying to win an election at a certain point.
Yeah. No, I think as a society, our tolerance for difference, for the unknown, for ambiguity is less in many ways. And maybe that's because of our quick fix, instant result world in many ways. We haven't learned the skills that we had in earlier times to work with some of these fearful scenarios. And this may be especially true at the level of the university, but it's Also true in social media. We get triggered very easily,
Yes.
very quickly, and we seem to equate ideas with actions. And ideas and the exchange of ideas don't necessarily mean you're going to be killed or knifed in 1 second.
Yeah.
However, we're so amped up, partly because of this, the social media amplification of our fears and political rhetoric doing that, and sensationalism that's all around us. It is more amped up, and also because I think we're again lacking the equipment to work with that amping up, because we're so increasingly reliant on our tech to solve our problems. Kind of, the external world, again, instant answers, instant gratification. We don't know how to sit in those less comfortable places and work with them. What I would say is that, generally speaking, the closer we are in the radius of direct threat, physical danger,
Yeah.
the naturally the harder it is to have more responsive, centered conversations, right? You're
Yeah.
not going to have a good deliberation with somebody if they're about to throttle you.
No.
Makes sense. But the problem is that I think a lot of people fear that that's going to happen a lot more quickly than it actually does, and so we have more of a luxury of being able to engage in discovery-oriented conversations and ideas than we often realize. We're not in a war zone. Thankfully, most of us are not. And we should realize the luxury we have in having relative safety in that way.
That's the most fascinating part to me, is that we are in a situation where, and this goes beyond politics, just on, look at any metric for which we have judged human civilizations from Sumeria to today, and we're at the top of it. Congratulations, we are at the top of, with variance for statistical noise. We are richer, we are healthier, we are stronger, better, faster, more beautiful than we have ever been in the history of the world. And yet you have sentiment about, well, my kids are not going to live a better life than mine, or things like that. And those are measurable, the anxiety there. I'm putting together now, based on our conversation, that I wonder if access to a little bit of everything, which our technology gives us and is a tremendous gift, if maybe the access to that little bit is a breeding ground for anxiety. And certainly, if you look at the world of politics, that is no doubt the case. Let me ask you about this. Something that you work with is experiential democracy dialogue. Easy for me to say. Explain what that is.
Yeah, that's a dialogue format I developed 15, 20 years ago. But I've refined it in the last few years. I was a trained moderator for the grassroots movement, conflict mediation movement called Braver Angels. And they have some 12,000 members nationwide in all 50 states. They basically developed living room style dialogues for self-identified liberals and conservatives to get together and work with each other. And that was at the point just before Trump's election in fall of 2016. So I had some fascinating experiences with people on the other side, so to speak.
Sure. Yeah.
We met at their homes and each other's homes, and learned a kind of process of humanizing dialogue rather than coming at each other with stereotypes and labels, which is what the fear-based, the primal terror-based approach brings, right? It narrows our perception and makes us very reactive with each other, so that we feel like we have more control
Yeah.
Right? We can pump ourselves up and think, oh, we have the right answer, and they are lower than us, and have, the demonic answer. We can demonize. Anyway, experiential democracy dialogue is a more intimate approach, I would say, because it's a one-on-one approach that brings some depth therapy principles to the fore. It basically is a 6-phase model that helps people who are on contrasting sides of cultural or political issues to gradually see each other more as human beings rather than labels and stereotypes. We can get into the details of the phases if you want.
Yeah. No, let's do it. Yeah.
Okay, well, I've been doing this all over the world, actually. I've been
Good.
facilitating a lot of these webinars. It's my own, perhaps vain attempt to try to promote, more humanistic ways of living with each other, of just learning to live and let live. If we could do that, we could go a long way with our problems in the world today. But the basic format, 6-phase, is that we begin, we don't even begin with the conversation about the issue at hand. We choose a topic. So maybe it's about, let's say, recently I did hate speech on campus.
Okay.
We had a libertarian view, and we had a more restricted speech point of view. And so just the beginning is what I call the visualization phase, where I invite both partners just to close their eyes and observe what are the thoughts, feelings, sensations, images that come up as they even envision engaging with one another before they even do, so that they have more of a sense of what's operating on them, what their knee-jerk reactions are to each other. And it's often labels and stereotypes. And not to get fixated on any one, watch them like they're flowing down a river.
Yeah.
And then I ask them to take a moment and see if you can sort of dream into a human being that's in front of you, as opposed to just this label or stereotype. A person with the real story, the real struggle, real wounds, etc., and more to them than that initial reaction. And then the second phase, again, not even getting to the dialogue yet. Second phase is background, because we're trying to help fill out the context. Where are people coming from? It's much better to know where people are coming from rather than jumping right into a dialogue about something. We've learned through many decades of conflict mediation that you need priming. So the second phase is the background phase, where we learn about, each partner describes what it was like to grow up in the light of this particular issue. Let's say hate speech. How did your parents treat that? How did your culture treat that? Was there a critical incident in your life where you had to deal with that and it affected you? So people have more context of where you're coming from, your background in terms of the issue. Then the third phase is the taking a stance, and that's where you're describing your stance. And all of this, by the way, has to be anchored in ground rules. And the facilitator makes sure that the folks are not, throwing darts at each other, accusing each other, devaluing each other, but they're just coming from, as much as possible, a place of genuine curiosity and discovery, as opposed to imposing their views on each other. This is not a debate.
No.
So anyway, so the third phase, describing their stances, uninterrupted, reflecting back what they heard each other saying, and then correcting gaps in that. And then the fourth phase is the stereotypes phase, which I borrowed directly from Braver Angels. It's very evocative. It's got 3 parts. First part is the speaking partner identifies the stereotypes that have been imposed on them by people negative.
Oh, okay. So they call out their own stereotypes.
Well, they call out to their partner how they felt degraded and devalued by others saying that, oh, you're just this bleeding heart liberal, or you're this gun-toting, woman-hating
Yeah.
conservative. So the partner hopefully has a little more empathy of this is how they feel reduced. And then the second part is for the speaking partner to correct any false and misleading aspects of the stereotype, to fill out their humanity and more of the picture of who they really are beyond the stereotype. And the third part is maybe toughest for everyone, which is identify the nuggets of truth to the stereotypes.
Yes.
There usually are some nuggets of truth. So you're opening to your partner, your fuller humanity, and also your flaws and foibles. It's hard to have a conversation with somebody who's holier than thou.
Yeah.
You're real humans here. The fifth phase is you ask a question from genuine curiosity as opposed to having answers in your question or gotcha questions. And the final phase is discovery and results, where you look at what did you both learn? What did you learn about yourselves, about your view, about your relationship with each other, which is an important part of this process, because you're learning a kind of a new, what we call holding environment between people who are on very different sides and who would otherwise demonize each other. But here, hopefully, the holding environment is more humanizing and helps people to feel, well, what we found in the research from Braver Angels, it helps people to feel more understanding of the other and more understood, and also less angry at each other.
Yeah.
So if you can just get people to engage in these more civil ways, adhering strictly to ground rules, guardrails, that could possibly go a long way, if it was massive enough, to creating a more civil society and keep different views,
Yeah, everything that you just described is, I think, incredibly healthy. And when I, having been in this line of work, I watch entirely unproductive political conversations for the majority of my work-a-day 9 to 5 plus life. But what I'm seeing there is we have a lack of adrenaline. We are trying to drain the adrenaline out of a conversation where you're immediately into fight or flight stuff. You are engaging in true curiosity of, well, hold on, if this is safe to actually have these conversations, then now I'm interested. Now I'm excited about it. And from that, you were getting a fuller picture of humanity, which is fantastic. I don't believe that this is necessarily impossible through digital channels, but I will say, and I am a big techno optimist. I am a huge defender of the internet on almost every level. But I will say this, from the birth of the earliest message board, it has proven entirely unproductive for that level of dialogue, the kind of dialogue that reduces adrenaline and creates a good curiosity. Now, maybe message boards and social media in general are not the place for it. The beauty of the internet is you can create a billion different delivery methods, and maybe there are better ones up to and including telecommunication places like this, and maybe we continue to drift further into it. But do you think that level of communication is even possible in a text-only or text-majority-based message board system, the likes of which we define our social media?
Well, I would say it's not optimal. I think person-to-person, live, so to speak, is optimal.
Yes.
But I know that it's helpful because I've gotten very good feedback back generally about these experiential democracy dialogues I've facilitated in different parts of the country and world. It can be done, but it has to be done. It can't be done in the usual social media.
No,
it's
I would agree.
Quick. So my standard approaches are 3-hour webinars.
Yes.
Where I describe the background of this approach and what I call the polarized mind, which is the mindset that I think comes out of this terror-based, primal terror-based mentality that narrows our perception and makes us fixate on a single point of view to the utter exclusion of competing points of view. That's the polarized mind. And then I go into, okay, this is one way to try to help give people tools to work with the polarized mind, to depolarize. And then I often have a demonstration between two partners who are often selected beforehand because we know that they can hold it together even though they have very contrasting views, but they can be good models for audiences to see the 6 phases, see them undergo the 6 phases demonstrated. And then I open it up to the audience to go into pairs and take them through the 6 phases in Zoom rooms, usually, so they're just dyads. And then we have a general discussion. That all takes about 3 hours.
Yeah.
It's 50 minutes per 6 phase encounters, for the full dialogue process. So it can be done, and people often seem to really feel impacted by it. And, of course, the question is, can this become more of a national movement and spread much more than it is? I think that's the bigger question.
Well, let me ask you this then, Kirk, and this will be the last question here for you. Obviously, you've described a great process, one that has been refined over time, and you've done a lot, and it is time intensive. So if that's, the game show, what is the at home version? If listeners here who are hear what you've said and want to practice some of this in their own daily lives, are there any tips or tricks so they can apply some of these principles? Obviously not the full thing, but something that they can just take with them.
Yeah, first of all, I would recommend that they read my books on this. The Depolarizing of America, a guidebook for social healing, has a lot of information about how to work these dialogues in the household, in communities, and even at the governmental, diplomatic settings. That would be ideal to get leaders to involve themselves more here. Generally, it's helpful to have a facilitator and somebody schooled in mental health, who can, and mediation, who can keep people within the guardrails of the ground rules. But it really comes down to a question of, are people ready and willing to engage in these kind of dialogues? And if they are, they can do it in their homes. So it might be, 2 family members. It might be helpful for one family member to be a facilitator and to really know the ground rules and keep the partners, within those. But you could do even one-on-one, again, if you're ready and willing to do it. And in my latest book, Life Enhancing Anxiety, I have a very recent version of the 6-phase model and a whole discussion about it in one of the chapters that can be helpful. It certainly can be done on one's own, but again, I would give a lot of caveats to do reading about it, to get background on it, to really absolutely adhere to the ground rules. Otherwise, it goes south very quickly. And if need be, just withdraw if it's overwhelming, because this stuff can be very charged, and if it feels like too much, then just stop. You're not ready, or you're both not ready, or you're not in a place where you want to do this. There are other ways of dealing with being on different sides of issues, including, civil protest. But also, if you're overwhelmed by it, maybe talk to a friend about your difficult feelings before you get into the dialogue, or see a counselor. I mean, there are a number of ways that people can try to de-escalate so that they can enter into these dialogues. I can tell you that in our work with Braver Angels, we had pretty hardcore conservatives and liberals. So it can reach a pretty wide range of folks, as long as as long as they can, relatively speaking, hold it together and stay with the ground rules.
Yeah, if folks have not heard about Braver Angels, it is a fascinating group that I would encourage people to poke in on, because some of the stories that come out of there, I believe actually, and I'm connecting dots here that I'm pretty sure are correct, but the current Democratic candidate Dean Phillips, when I was covering him in New Hampshire during his stump speech, told a story about sitting in on a Braver Angels meeting that, as I'm sure you probably have similar stories, can get very colorful in the process, where people are, naming stereotypes or stereotypes about themselves. But usually, at least, throughout anything that I've heard about it, the outgassing tends to have a positive result once you've, again, kind of expelled the adrenaline and you lean on what I think is, in my mind, the cornerstone of all Western society: curiosity and understanding, and breaking down barriers and continuing to strengthen the foundations that we believe in. It's fascinating and great work.
And thank you. Well, yeah, and what we've often found is that people don't necessarily come to an agreement about policy per se.
No.
They might find common ground around something else that came up, like the family backgrounds or something that they shared together in the course of their dialogue about their own wounds, their own struggles. The empathy can be very powerful. And, look, if we can just sit with one another in a more mature and civil way, that would go a long way to, advancing our democratic way of life, our democratic republic way of life. One other point I'll make quickly is I have examples of this kind of work in a new YouTube channel called Core of Depth Healers. That's core like Peace Corps, CORPS, of depth healers, where I have experts in depth psychotherapy, meaning therapy that really tries to hear and see people and gets at the root of their problems. But these are experts who have translated their depth therapeutic principles to social crises, addressing social crises. And it includes examples of Braver Angels, Experiential Democracy Dialogue, and other work that may be of help to people.
I think that for folks who are interested in this conversation, I would very much encourage folks to go ahead and read, listen, and subscribe to everything that Dr. Schneider just recommended. The most recent book is Life Enhancing Anxiety. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Justin, for the opportunity. Really enjoyed it.
And that'll wrap it up for us today. Politics, 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 written and hosted by me, Justin Robert Young, for Dog and Pony Show Audio in Austin, Texas. If you would like to say thank you to Gabe Fleischer, you can do so. Letter P, letter X, number 3, guest.com. You can find, follow, and share video clips of the show. TikTok is Justin R. Young for now. Who knows how long TikTok's going to be around. Instagram is Justin R. Young. YouTube, by the way, full video episodes on TikTok. Or sorry, on YouTube at youtube.com/politics, politics, politics. I think it's an @ politics, politics, politics. For the whole episode, you can see my face. It's pretty good. I like it. Head on over there right now. We need some subscribers. Ring the bell. Hit the button. Comment. It's a good time. Also, we do live streaming there. You can send me an email, theyoungamerican@gmail.com. On Twitter, @PX3Tweets is where you get our show. And then Justin R. Young is my account. We are also live on Twitch, px3live.com. And you can share this podcast with your friends, family, and clergy, px3podcast.com. You can hit me off with a one-time donation, paypal.me/payjury. Venmo is Justin-Young-20. Cash App is PX3Cash, and you can send me anything you'd like in the mail. P.O. Box 153184, Austin, Texas, 78715. Again, that is Post Office Box 153-184, Austin, Texas, 78715. Of course, you can get our bonus content only at takepoliticsseriously.com. $3 tier gets you 2 bonus podcasts per week covering all the news we miss on our free podcasting schedule. And you get video versions of them too. Not just the free episodes. Video versions of the bonus episodes available exclusively at takepoliticsseriously.com. And of course, our $10 tier gets your name read at the end of the podcast, along with everything you get at the $3 tier, like these fine folks at the Titanic. $10 tier: Sam, John, Niemeister, Edwin, and vote Gloria Young for King of the New World Order. Brian, Edison, Jeremy, a dog named Trucker, Sarah Jeannie, Spider, Matthew, Dr. G, Dustin, Brad, D-Laser, Nick, Just Another Pilot, Middle-Aged Mike, Utah, Jimmy Montana, The Jen, Alo, D. Reilly, Andrew, Lisa, Fat Tony's PJs from New York, Devon, the CFP, Gloria, Gray Zone, Peepaw, Jay, Neil, Ye Old Pinball Shop, John, DP4 Bongo, Neil, his nerdiness, Charles, Audrey stole Adler's spot, Darren, Idris, Arslanian, Berkeley, Stephen, Pneumatic, Terran, Molly's delightful demeanor, Adam, Chief Andy, Robert, Casey, and Paul. You want your name read? The end of the show. Folks, come on. Only one place to do it. TakePoliticsSeriously.com. And that brings us to the end of the week. So I promised you an update. I was going to do the What Happens If Biden and Trump Die episode today. Started looking into it, started writing it, realized that there's more research and more archive that I want to pull for this. And with that being said, we're going to delay it a little bit. We'll have it on Wednesday. We also have a good immigration guest coming on. Actually, not an immigration guest, a good border guest. Because I want to do my best to try and split this up. Because I do believe that the border and immigration are two different issues. And if you are answering a solution for one with the other, then you are not helping anything. So we have a border guest coming up next week. And I think you're really going to like him. He knows his stuff. And there's a lot of really, really good information to be had from somebody literally on the front lines. But that'll be next week. Till then, this is your old pal Justin Robert Young saying some shows talk about politics, others talk about politics, and still more discuss politics. But this is the only show that dares discuss all three.